Hello, guys. Tonight we will travel thousands of years back to the banks of the Nile to a civilization known for its pyramids, pharaohs, and gods who watch your every movement. But behind the gold masks and grandiose temples hides a much harsher reality. Today we ask ourselves, what would happen if you lived just one day in ancient Egypt? Because, let me tell you, the sun isn't the only thing that will scorch you alive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching us from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who joins us from different parts of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan to have a soft background murmur. And let's start tonight's journey together. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of pyramids, gods, and relentless ultraviolet rays. Even before you open your eyes, the sun is already pouring into your reed hut, as if auditioning for the role of a relentless god. There are no curtains or blinds, and, of course, no air conditioning. Only the raw and relentless heat of the desert, which scorches everything, including you, at breakfast. You're lying on a straw mat with a linen sheet that, more than protecting, suggests the breeze from the Nile that they promise you in all those travel documentaries. Yes, it has vanished. It probably died sometime around 2800 BC. By the time you stagger out, the temperature is already around 32 degrees Celsius. And it's not even noon yet. The sun doesn't just shine in ancient Egypt. It attacks your linen tunic. Useless. It's like wearing tissue paper in a sauna. And don't even think about sunscreen. There is no aloe vera or SPF 50 or even a flexible hat with the logo of a beach resort. The ancient Egyptians had protective oils, but unless you are rich or work in a temple, you are not going to get any. Your best option is to smear yourself with mud or crocodile excrement, which apparently could prevent you from becoming a human torch. Emphasis on could. At noon, the stones under your feet are so hot that they could cook lentils. Shade is a luxury. Trees are scarce. Maybe you will find some relief by hiding behind a mud wall, but even they'll be sweating now. You, on the other hand, look like you've been put in a mud oven and they forgot to set the timer. And you better not complain. Ra, the sun god, is watching you. And in ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just the weather. It was divine authority. The hotter it was, the more powerful Ra felt. So, basically, if you're melting, it's a spiritual compliment. In short, surviving a day in ancient Egypt requires hydration, humility, and a bulletproof tolerance to feeling like roast chicken. And this is only the morning. You have finally gotten out of bed, or rather out of your rough straw mat. And the good news is that the Nile is only a few steps away. The bad news is that you can already smell it before seeing it. Yes, the mighty Nile, the life-giver of ancient Egypt, revered as sacred, the reason why civilization exists here. But let's be honest, it also smells like a fish market had a bad breakup with a swamp. The banks are full of flies, frogs, and things that probably shouldn't have legs, but do. Still, this is where you bathe. Soap still has not been invented, and even if it existed, you could not afford it. Instead, you lather yourself with the newest cleaning technology of the moment, sand. That is right. Exfoliation, Egyptian style. You only have to rub yourself with coarse grains and call it skincare. It is like nature's sandpaper, but less effective. The clothes are also washed in the Nile. And by washing, we mean hitting them against the rocks while you pray that a crocodile does not mistake your laundry for a tasty snack. Oh, and to make it more fun, let's not forget the occasional sewage spills from upstream. Remember that people, livestock, and sometimes funeral boats share this river. And yet, somehow it is considered clean. You rub yourself, rinse, and go out feeling a little less sticky and only moderately more worried about leeches. If you're an inhabitant of Memphis or a thief, you may be lucky enough to use a public fountain or cistern, but for everyone else, it's either the Nile or nothing. And do not expect privacy. It is a public space shared by families, neighbors, livestock, and the odd ibis that pecks around ankles as if it paid rent. Jars of water are filled, balanced on heads, and carried back to the adobe houses before the midday heat turns the clay into toast. It is a daily, spiritual, necessary, and slightly traumatic ritual. So yes, the Nile is sacred. It feeds you, cleans you, and quenches your thirst. But let's not pretend it's a shimmering oasis. In reality, it is partly a miracle, partly a biological hazard, and everything you have. By now, you have bathed in the crocodile-infested Nile. You have scrubbed yourself half clean, and your body looks like a baked figure. It's time for breakfast, the most important and least glamorous meal of your day in ancient Egypt. Let's be clear, there are no eggs Benedict or fruit bowls, much less iced coffees. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is more a tactical resupply operation than a culinary event. You sit on a low stool, if you have one, or simply squat in a corner like everyone else. The central element of your meal, the bread. A lot of bread. Dense, thick, and often as hard as a leather sandal. It is made of emmer, wheat, or barley and baked in clay ovens that may or may not be shared with local rats. And do not be surprised if you find sand in your slice. It is not an ingredient, just an unwanted guest from the grinding stones. You could say it's your daily dose of minerals. Then comes the beer. But do not get excited. It is not a fresh and bubbly craft beer. It is a thick, cloudy, and warm liquid, similar to bread. More like a porridge than a pint. It is full of calories and slightly fermented. A medieval smoothie with a slight taste of sour cereals and survival. Even children drink it, not for being daring, but because it is safer than water. At least the brewing process eliminates the parasites. Unlike the Nile, which, as we just discussed, is basically a petri dish. If you are lucky, and we mean a lot of luck, maybe you will get an onion or some dried dates to accompany your carbon foam combination. Proteins only if someone has fished something and has not eaten it raw immediately. And while you chew your rock-hard bread and sip your cereal sludge, flies buzz around as if it were a buffet, because it is. For them. You scare them away with one hand, hold the cup with the other, and try not to think too much that it is probably the best food you will have all day. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is not about taste, but about function. It gives you enough energy to survive until the next time someone hands you another brick of sandy bread. Bon appetit. You have already taken your sandy bread, your thick beer, and just enough rest to consider yourself functional. Now it's time to work. And believe me, work in ancient Egypt makes modern exhaustion seem like a spa day. Unless you are a scribe, priest, or member of royalty. Let's face it, you are not. Your work is pure muscle and dust. No air conditioning, no coffee breaks, no ergonomic chairs, just sweat, sand, and the constant risk of fainting before noon. If you are a farmer, at dawn you will be with your ankles sunk in the Nile's mud, pulling weeds or planting barley under the gaze of a foreman whose hobby seems to be yelling. You use wooden plows, rudimentary sickles, in your own hands. If your back hurts, congratulations. That means you're working. If you're a worker, things get even more biblical. Imagine transporting stones of several tons for the construction of a temple under a scorching sun, barefoot on gravel ramps, and prayers. There is no sea here. If you trip, you break an ankle, and the foreman shrugs. That's a broken ankle and a shrug from the foreman. Working in tombs. That is another level of effort. You are hammering limestone, chiseling funerary chambers for people who will rest longer than you ever will. And if you mess up a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say job security could involve a sealed chamber and a curse. And if you're a woman, you are not spared. Domestic work is also physical work. Grinding grain, carrying water, weaving linen, taking care of children, and continuing to help in the field. Your rest is when the baby sleeps for 7 minutes. While you prepare dinner, you eat on the go. You wipe the sweat with your tunic. You keep moving because slowing down means falling behind. And falling behind means that someone else gets your share of grain, and you get the blame. There is no departure time. The sun is your supervisor. When it finally sets behind the horizon, you drag yourself home half dead, covered in dust, and dreaming of softer sandals and a less aggressive sun god. Work in ancient Egypt is not only hard, it is endless. It is a total commitment to survival day after day until your body gives up or your foreman decides you don't deserve food. And that's not the worst. After sweating blood in the fields or in the quarry, you may be tempted to complain. Perhaps something small like "this job sucks" or "why am I doing this?" Stop right there. Because in ancient Egypt, complaining is not only frowned upon, it is potentially treason. Why? Because your boss is not just a ruler. He is literally a god. The pharaoh is not a guy who has been elected or born into a fortunate family. He is the human incarnation of Horus, son of Ra, chosen by the heavens to rule Egypt and keep the Ma'at, the divine cosmic order, intact. In other words, if the river overflows well this year, thank the pharaoh. If not, well, maybe you haven't prayed enough. Questioning his authority is not only bad manners, it is blasphemy. Speaking ill of him could cost you a date with a whip, a pair of shackles, or an early trip to the underworld without any of your favorite funerary objects. His face is everywhere, in statues, on temple walls, on coins, even in bread molds. His name is sung during rituals. His image appears painted larger than anyone else's in all the murals. It is not an artistic exaggeration. It is the law, and do not expect to ever see him. If you're a commoner, the closest you will get is seeing a golden boat pass by during a religious festival. If you blink, it disappears. Back to a palace that you will never enter, surrounded by officials, guards, scribes, and enough gold to finance a small civilization. Which, curiously, is basically what he does. If you're lucky enough to work on a real project, such as a tomb, temple, or mountain-sized statue, you serve with divine joy. At least that is what the state says. You say it too, because pretending that carving stone for 14 hours a day is an honor is safer than the alternative. And do not even think about rebelling. The pharaohs crush uprisings faster than you can say dynasty. Ask the last town that tried not to pay taxes. Oh wait, you cannot. It no longer exists. Now get back to work. If you thought surviving under the sun was hard, wait until you realize that in ancient Egypt, sand is your roommate, co-worker, condiment, and mortal enemy. It is everywhere, in your clothes, bed, and food. There is no way to escape. You could be working, praying, sleeping, or minding your own business in the market. And suddenly a gust of hot wind hits your face in a grainy exfoliation experiment that you did not ask for. Let's start with clothes. You wear linen. It is light, breathable, and as effective at keeping sand out as a screen door is at holding soup. It slides down your tunic, sticks to your skin, and somehow finds its way into places you did not know existed. Eat. Good luck. Each loaf of bread is basically a sand trap. Since the flour was ground between stone slabs, small pieces of sand would seep into the dough. The Egyptians not only ate wheat, they also ate the grinding stones. That is why ancient dental remains are often worn down like river stones. Imagine chewing breakfast while filing your teeth daily. And if you thought your house was a sand-free zone, think again. Your mud brick house has gaps, cracks, and windows without glass. They are perfect portals for the wind-blown sand. Your floors are covered. Your pots are full. Your bed is basically a sandbox disguised as furniture. Shoes are optional at best. Most Egyptians walked barefoot, which means you're always one step away from turning your feet into battered leather. If you have footwear, it is usually a pair of basic rope sandals. Maybe they are fashionable. Protective? Not a chance. Then there's sandstorms. The Egyptian version of a divine slap. Sudden, swirling, blinding. One moment you're talking with a friend, and the next you're spitting dust, feeling as if someone threw a beach in your eyes. The visibility reduces to zero, and everyone around you becomes vague, coughing silhouettes. In short, the sand is the roommate that never leaves, the salt of life, and the silent enemy of your eyes, lungs, and dignity. It is not just the backdrop of your life. Now, it is a part of your body. And no, you cannot just wash yourself. You have already tried it in the Nile, which is probably even fuller of sand. In ancient Egypt, religion is not only a weekend activity. It is the operating system for everything. Your work, your diet, your hygiene routine, your rituals before going to bed, everything dictated by gods that seem to have very specific opinions. First, understand this point. The gods are simply everywhere. Your city has temples dedicated to dozens of deities, each responsible for some vital function. There is Ra, who pilots the sun through the sky as if it were a divine Uber. This snake-headed god is the god of wisdom and is in charge of scribes and lunar calendars. Sabak, half crocodile, half nightmare, watches over the Nile. And Badet, the cat goddess, basically handles public relations. Forget about all personal freedom. Your daily routine revolves around pleasing them. Wake up, thank RA, spill some beer, ask Hathor for forgiveness, hit your toe, curse quietly, or risk attracting a spiteful spirit. Before meals, offer some food to the gods. Before going to bed, pray that Set, the god of chaos, does not turn your house into existential chaos during the night. Even funerals are multi-day events in which the deceased must pass tests, avoid demons, and prove they were morally decent or risk eternal erasure. Speaking of the afterlife, the ancient Egyptians took it very seriously. You don't just die and pass on. You must go through a judgment process in which your heart is weighed against a feather of truth. If your heart weighs more because of lies, cruelty, or perhaps stealing someone's goat, a mit devours you. A creature with a crocodile head, a lion's body, and the legs of your worst nightmare. So yes, even after death, you're still on parole. But here's a twist. This complex belief system isn't depressing. It is actually comforting. The Egyptians believed that life was part of a cosmic balance. And if you followed the rituals and defended Ma'at, the principle of truth and order, you had the opportunity to achieve a peaceful eternity with food, family, and perhaps a boat. Of course, the richer you were, the more the gods seemed to notice. The temples were huge, the priests were powerful, and the peasants, well, they just hoped that the gods would feel generous that day. Because in ancient Egypt, faith is not optional. It is your job description, your insurance plan, and your travel itinerary for the next life. So you have stepped on something sharp, something strange has bitten you, or you have contracted something contagious, which in ancient Egypt is basically a Tuesday. It is time to seek some medical attention. But don't expect a waiting room or a sterile environment. You will be cured with a combination of spells, herbs, and pure optimism. First, they will take you to a doctor. And, to be fair, they were some of the most advanced in the ancient world. They had surgical instruments, medical texts, and a fairly acceptable knowledge of anatomy. But here's the crux. Science in ancient Egypt was always accompanied by a strong dose of magic. They give you a poultice made of honey, moldy bread, and crushed herbs. Honey is antibacterial, and mold has properties similar to penicillin, so it more or less works. But before applying it, the healer recites a protective spell just in case, because you never know if the stomach cramps are actually the result of a spiteful ghost or angry god. Does your head hurt? Do you have a headache? Maybe they rub your scalp with crushed onion while someone recites a hymn too. But what is that? Let's spread cow manure mixed with dates on your chest to see what happens. Eye infection. It's time for a paste of lizard blood, ochre, and beer, and a prayer to Horus. Surgery. Sometimes it was practiced. Abscesses were drained, bones were set, and wounds sutured with linen thread. But there is no anesthesia, just a sharp knife and a friend holding your shoulders while you scream into a mud brick pillow. Dentistry is not very good. Do you remember all the sand in the bread? Your teeth are worn down at 20 years. If one gets infected, you have 3 options: live with it, die, or have it extracted with something like pliers made by an unskilled blacksmith. And let's not forget the amulets. Whether you're giving birth, being sewn up, or just sneezing too hard, a good doctor or priest will probably hang an amulet around your neck, just in case the real problem is an invisible snake's spirit coiled around your spleen. So, yes, Egyptian medicine had its moments, but in general it was better to believe in the gods because your band-aid is literally a prayer. Here is an unexpected twist that most people do not expect. The women of ancient Egypt had more rights than many women in later civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, file for divorce, and even take men to court. Sound progressive, right? But before you pack your bag for a boss vacation in time, wait a moment. Because although their legal status may impress you, everyday reality was not so glamorous. If you're a woman in ancient Egypt, you probably get up before dawn. You grind the grain by hand with a giant flat stone that crushes both the wheat and your spine. Then you go to get water from the Nile, prepare breakfast, take care of the children, manage the home, feed the animals, and, if necessary, help in the field. You are a woman working alone in the linen industry. There's no time for you, no spa days, and of course, no maternity leave either. Giving birth is risky and painful. Midwives are a great help, but there are no epidurals, disinfectants, or playlists with relaxing heart music. You give birth in a hot room with incense, prayers, and, hopefully, without bleeding too much. Let's talk about fashion. Linen dresses are light and breathable, but there is no underwear or shoes. The sun burns your skin, the sand gets everywhere, and the insects see you as a free buffet. Do you want makeup? Great. Egyptian women use cosmetics, but they were lead-based and applied with sticks that looked like toothpicks. Now, if you're lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family, things are better. You could read, write, manage the accounts of the estate, or become a priestess. If you were born into royalty, you could even become a pharaoh like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, who ruled with brilliance and terrifying eyeliner. But if you were poor, your status might be legal, but your reality was physical. You worked, sweated, crouched, carried, gave birth, buried, and prayed. You were not chained by the law, but by survival. Even so, Egyptian women had decision-making power, and that was important. They could speak in court, keep their inheritance, and did not become property when they got married. Compared with many ancient societies, that is a lot. So yes, Egyptian women had rights, but comfort was reserved for statues and goddesses. Not the women who submerged themselves to their elbows in dough while shooing flies from a small child. You have survived another exhausting day in ancient Egypt. You have eaten hard bread. You have carried buckets. You have avoided divine wrath, and perhaps you have even dodged a sandstorm. It's time to relax, right? Well, no, because in ancient Egypt, the real test begins after death. Death is not the end. It is only the beginning of an incredibly bureaucratic, multi-phase journey through the underworld. And if you thought the foreman was strict, wait until you meet the gods of judgment. First, your soul travels to the Hall of Mot. There, before a court of 42 deities, you must proclaim your innocence in what is basically the oldest legal declaration ever. You say things like, I did not steal. I did not lie. I did not cover my neighbor's donkey. All this in the hope that the gods will believe it. Then comes the test to the heart. Literally, your heart, believed to be the seat of the soul, is placed on a scale against the feather of Mot, symbol of truth, justice, and balance. If your heart weighs more than the feather, it means you have lived an evil life. Enter a Mit, half lion, half crocodile, half hippopotamus. All terrifying. She does not arrest you. She does not fine you. She eats your soul, destroying it forever. There is no life after death, no second chances, only eternal non-existence, which in a culture obsessed with eternity is the ultimate punishment. And there is still more. You can condemn yourself not only for your actions, but also for your words. A wrong confession, a forgotten phrase during your trial, and boom, spiritual annihilation. It's like an open book exam where failure means being devoured by a mythological death hybrid. If you pass, congratulations. You enter the field of reeds, a peaceful, idealized version of Egypt where your soul lives forever with boats, crops, family, and presumably fewer sand fleas. But what is at stake here is enormous. That is why the Egyptians became obsessed with the preparation of tombs, funeral rites, and magical texts such as the Book of the Dead, a spiritual cheat sheet full of prayers, spells, and useful advice such as do not insult the crocodile god. So yes, life after death can be beautiful, but only if you live your life very carefully. A swear word, an unpaid temple tax, and your next destination will be a Mit's lunch. Sleep well. If there is a small consolation in ancient Egypt, it is this linen. Blessed, breathable linen. Your entire wardrobe and everyone else's is made of this plant fabric. It is light, cool, and lets the skin breathe under the scorching heat. That's the good news. The bad news is that that's where the comfort ends. Whether you're a farmer, bricklayer, priest, or salesman, you wear the same outfit every day. Men wear a white short skirt or loincloth. Women wear a straight, sleeveless linen dress, sometimes held with straps, sometimes without them. If you're upper class, you may have pleats, beads, or elegant prints. If you are not, it is plain white or slightly grayish, depending on how long it has been since laundry day. Oh, and laundry day. You scrub the clothes by hand in the Nile, while waiting for a hippopotamus not to appear in the middle. Most people go barefoot. The sandals made of leather or woven strips are reserved for special occasions or for the priests of the temple. So unless you're a royalty, prepare to spend your days with hot sand between your toes and possibly some sharp stone in your heel. Accessories, of course, but above all, functional. Amulets to protect themselves, necklaces to show status, and makeup for the eyes made of powdered charcoal, which wasn't just fashion. It helped reduce sun glare and supposedly protected against infections. Yes, even eyeliner had a function in ancient Egypt. But no matter how well you dress, the insects don't care. Flies, mosquitoes, gnats. They consider your light clothing an invitation. You spend the day swatting, rubbing yourself with perfumed oils, and praying that your linen clothes don't stick to you like a wet curtain as soon as the sun reaches its maximum intensity. And, of course, your clothing does not change with the seasons because Egypt has no seasons, only heat and a bit less heat. So your linen outfit is basically your uniform throughout the year, whether at 43 degrees Celsius or on a cold afternoon at 21 degrees Celsius. So yes, Egyptian clothing was light, elegant, and far more comfortable than what the Romans would wear later. But don't be fooled by the vaporous costumes, because no matter how light your tunic seems, your life is still hard with a lot of work, heat, and sand, and insects that do not respect your personal space. You have survived. Another scorching Egyptian day, carrying bricks, dodging sandstorms, and praying that your linen clothes don't disintegrate in the middle of work. But in ancient Egypt, survival is always temporary. Because no matter how tough you are, you probably won't live past 35 years. Let's analyze this. If you manage to survive childhood, which is already an achievement considering that infant mortality rates were very high, you're pushed directly into adulthood at age 13. Marriage, work, and raising children begin early because, frankly, you have little time left. You could die from heat stroke, from an infected wound, from giving birth, because of crocodiles, from scorpion stings, or from eating bad bread. And forget about antibiotics. If you have a fever, the best treatment is honey, herbs, and hoping the gods don't have other plans for your soul. But here's the twist. The Egyptians were not afraid of death. They planned for it. In fact, they planned it better than most people plan their retirement today. If you are rich, you order a tomb, the ancient version of a 5-star eternity suite. You start saving objects for the tomb, jewelry, food offerings, perfumes, statues, and even small servant dolls called shabaptis to do your chores in the afterlife. Think of them as spiritual interns who work while you sleep forever. Your body was embalmed, wrapped in linen, filled with natron, natural salt, and carefully placed in a painted sarcophagus. They bury you with a copy of the Book of the Dead, which is not so much about the end of the world as a mystical travel guide, with passwords to the afterlife, spells to confuse demons, and instructions not to be devoured by soul-devouring monsters. If you are poor, well, your tomb is probably a shallow hole in the sand. Your body is wrapped in whatever cloth your family can provide. Maybe 1 or 2 vessels placed nearby and then covered with earth. No murals, no gold mask, just you and the wind. But even the poorest Egyptians clung to the dream of life after death, a peaceful and fertile paradise called the Field of Reeds, where one cultivates without sweating, eats without hunger, and sails through the Nile onto the soft sunlight. So yes, you would probably die young in ancient Egypt. But if you lived well, prayed correctly, and did not insult too many jackal-headed gods, perhaps you would spend eternity in style. You have finally reached the afterlife, or at least the tomb. You have been embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. It's time to rest in peace, isn't it? Well, not exactly. Because in ancient Egypt, even the dead are stolen from. Let's start with a simple truth. The tombs are full of valuable objects, gold amulets, jewelry, perfumed oils, carved statues, chests full of linen clothes, and, for the pharaohs, literally ships full of treasures. All of it intended to be taken to the afterlife. But the treasures in a tomb are basically an open invitation for someone with a chisel and bad intentions. Tomb robbery was so common that it became a full-time problem. The pharaohs tried to combat it by hiding their tombs deep in cliffs, locking them behind traps, and scribbling terrible curses on the walls. Things like, "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May your members twist forever by a fire serpent." Spoiler: the curses did not work. The tomb robbers came anyway at night, secretly, with privileged information. Sometimes they were locals. Sometimes they were corrupt workers who had helped to build the tombs. In some cases, even the priests and guards were involved, and the punishment for being caught was severe. Think of public beatings, mutilation, exile, or death. But considering how valuable the objects in tombs were, especially gold and rare incense, the risk often seemed worth it. After all, the dead do not defend themselves. But they didn't just rob the rich. Even the tombs of commoners were desecrated. The poorest Egyptians could be buried with a small jar of beer or a loaf of bread for the afterlife. That was also worth stealing. Food was scarce, the tools were valuable, and linen was currency. The irony: tomb robbery wasn't only for greed. Sometimes it was for survival. Egypt suffered famines, political collapse, and invasions. A hungry worker could break into a tomb not for treasures, but for food. And when your children are starving, a few funerary offerings seem less sacred objects and more like dinner. So in ancient Egypt, you were not safe just for being dead. Your tomb could be looted, your name erased, and your mummy unwrapped by some desperate soul with a pick and little moral sense. Rest in peace. Only if nobody knows where you are buried. We have all seen them. Those majestic and mysterious engravings on walls of temples and tombs. Birds, eyes, snakes, lotus flowers, men walking sideways like on a fashion catwalk. The hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. Visually impressive and tremendously difficult to learn. Sure, they look great, but try reading them. Hieroglyphs were not just decorative art. They were a complete writing system with more than 700 characters and constantly growing. Some symbols represent complete words. Others are sounds, and many are determinatives that clarify meaning, because writing the word star with the symbol of a real star could be too simple. And don't expect spaces or punctuation. The writing of ancient Egypt was basically a long and beautiful riddle with an artistic touch, without vowels and with a deep need for context. Oh, and it could be written from left to right to left, or from top to bottom, depending on how the scribe felt that day. The trick is to look at the direction in which the birds or people are looking. That is the reading direction. If they look to the right, read to the right. If they look to the left, read to the left. And if they're upside down, good luck. Learning to write hieroglyphs was not for commoners. Literacy was uncommon. Perhaps 1% of the population knew how to read and write. If you wanted to be part of it, you had to become a scribe, which meant years of intense education, starting in childhood. You had to memorize hundreds of symbols, copy endless parchments, and practice so much that at 15 years old, your hand would probably curve like a claw. But the reward was enormous. The scribes were respected, well-fed, and never had to carry bricks under the sun. Instead, they wrote tax records, court documents, letters, and religious texts. They were essential to society and were protected from most manual labor. In a world in which writing was power, the scribes ruled silently from the shadows. For the rest of the population, however, writing was something magical. Literally, it was believed that hieroglyphs had sacred power. Writing someone's name preserved their soul. Erasing it meant total spiritual annihilation. So, yes, spelling was really important. So, although hieroglyphs may seem like ancient emojis, they are more like a linguistic Rubik's Cube wrapped in myth, mathematics, and mystery. Beautiful? Yes. Easy to learn? Not all. After 14 chapters of heat, hunger, sand, superstition, and exhausting work, it is time to ask the big question. Would you survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest. Probably not. Of course, It is easy to idealize the ancient world. Golden tombs, air scented with lotus, elegant hieroglyphs, gods with animal heads, and an obsession with order and beauty. But behind the iconic monuments and impressive art, there was a world of brutal realities that did not forgive anyone, except the elite. The normal day of an Egyptian began with a dirt floor, a cloud of flies, and the certainty that if you didn't work, you didn't eat. You walked barefoot on burning sand, carried water, cooked over bonfires, and lived shoulder to shoulder with insects, smoke, and cattle. You worried about diseases, divine punishment, and a snake slithering to your mat. You had no toothpaste, no medicine, no retirement plan, and, hopefully, maybe 2 changes of clothes. You served a king god who could take away your lands with a decree, a climate that cooked your skin at noon, and a religion that forced you to pass a literal divine test after death just to enter the good version of the afterlife. Let's not forget the things you didn't have either. There were no antibiotics, no sunscreen, no privacy, no plumbing, no painkillers, no easy way out. Once you were born into your class, that was it. There were no promotions, no career changes, no chance to find yourself. You were a scribe, farmer, laborer, mother, servant, or you were dead. And yet, despite all this, the ancient Egyptians were not unhappy. They believed deeply in their gods, in their purpose, and in the beauty of life. They loved music, dance, food, family, and parties. They joked, they painted, they imagined eternity so clearly that they built stone monuments that still stand today. But for a modern person, without air conditioning, filtered water, Advil, sneakers, and a smartphone, you wouldn't last even the second sandstorm. So no, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. But it's okay, because they lasted thousands of years. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we keep talking about them. In the heart of ancient Teotihuacan, a pyramid refuses to be forgotten. Its surface is not adorned with peaceful symbols of faith or benevolent gods, but with dozens of stone snakes that growl with open mouths. They protrude from the facade of the temple as if they were frozen mid-attack, with fangs bared and eyes wide open. This is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, known by many as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. But unlike most temples that rise to the sky with reverence, this one has a different air. It gives a predatory sensation. From the moment you approach, you have the unsettling sensation that you are being watched. The stone snake heads are more than mere decoration. They were warnings, symbols of divine wrath. And under their gaze, something terrible took place in the past. The excavations carried out in the last decades have revealed something that archaeologists did not expect. Hidden under the temple's base were not only ceremonial offerings, but something far more disturbing. Human remains. And not just a few. More than 200 bodies, many decapitated, with their hands tied behind their backs. Young, perhaps warriors, buried in groups as ritual sacrifices arranged with precision. Some were buried with obsidian knives at their side, others with necklaces of human teeth or jewels made with jaws. They were not simply thrown on the ground. They were deliberately placed in positions of symbolic meaning. It is clear that this was not a mass grave. It was a message, a divine transaction carved in stone and sealed by blood. But what kind of belief justifies such horror? Who demanded that so many lives be taken at once? The Temple of the Father Serpent was not only a religious building. It was a theater of power, a place where rulers merged cosmology, war, and fear to maintain control over a city of more than 100,000 souls. And this bloodletting ritual could have been the price paid to maintain the balance of the cosmos. Standing today before this temple, contemplating those stone snakes, you're not only seeing art or architecture. You're looking into the eyes of a civilization that believed that the gods needed blood and that they had every right to give it. But who were these people? Who ordered such violence and disappeared without trace? The answer lies in the shadows of Teotihuacan. Before the powerful Aztec Empire, before the Mayans carved their cosmic calendar in stone, there was a city unlike any other in ancient America, Teotihuacan. Its name, given by the later Aztecs, means the place where the gods were born. And when you walk through its immense avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids that touch the sky, you begin to understand why. At its peak, between the years 100 and 250 DC, Teotihuacan was an expanding metropolis with more than 100,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities in the world at that time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in size and influence. It was a meticulously planned city, with wide boulevards, cobbled streets, apartment complexes that housed extended families, and multi-story structures built of volcanic stone. And in the center of it all, 3 gigantic pyramids. The Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But this is what makes Teotihuacan different. Nobody knows who built it. Seriously, to this day, we do not know the name of the people who built this place. We don't even know what they called themselves. There are no written records, no names of kings carved in stone. Teotihuacan seems to have been a society governed not by a single monarch, but perhaps by a council, a theocracy, or something totally alien to our understanding of ancient power. And despite this anonymity, its influence was colossal. Evidence of the power of Teotihuacan has been found hundreds of kilometers from the Mayan cities of Tekal and Copan to the distant Zapotec capital of Monte Alban. Obsidian blades, ceramic styles, murals, and even political interference. In one case, the emissaries of Teotihuacan may have helped to overthrow a local Mayan king to install a ruler more favorable to their interests. But how did they maintain such a vast network? How did a city without a known writing system exercise such authority throughout Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they combined cosmic ideology with the art of governing. Their temples were more than just places of worship. They were tools of control, perfectly aligned with astronomical events, serving as settings for ritual sacrifices and reminding all citizens and visitors that Teotihuacan was not just any city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine that kept time, destiny, and blood flowing in sync. And in the center of everything was the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. To understand the temple, first understand the deity to which it was dedicated, the Feathered Serpent. Known later by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl and by the Mayans as Kulkin, this figure is among the most enigmatic gods of Mesoamerican mythology. But in Teotihuacan, centuries before the Aztecs rose to power, the Feathered Serpent was a central divine force, possibly supreme. But here is a paradox. What kind of god is both serpent and bird? Consider this. Serpents slide through the underworld. They shed skin, symbolizing rebirth, duality, and death. Birds fly high in the sky, closer to the sun, representing freedom, divinity, and life-giving wind. Combining these two elements, the earthly and the celestial, death and life, chaos and order, was to create something totally cosmic, something terribly powerful. The Feathered Serpent was more than a god. It was a bridge between worlds. On the temple's facade, carved in deep relief, we see dozens of images. Bulging eyes, sharp teeth, feathered headdresses. Some historians believe these represent the god himself. Others suggest they are warriors or priestly figures adorned with divine attire to signal authority. In any case, they appear everywhere. The temple is covered with these hybrids between serpents and birds, as if the structure itself breathed with a divine presence. But the Feathered Serpent was not just a god of skies. It was intimately linked to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that kept the cosmos in motion. And Quetzalcoatl, although later he would be remembered as a gentle, civilizing deity, had a darker role in Teotihuacan. He demanded offerings, not only corn or incense, but life itself. In some myths, he descended into the underworld to recover bones of the dead and to create humanity. But to bring life from death, there had to be an exchange. The gods sacrificed themselves for humanity. In return, humans were expected to do the same. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was more than a monument to faith. It was a cosmic engine designed to connect the sky, the earth, and the underworld through rituals. Each stone, each serpent head, each buried victim fueled that system. The Teotihuacan not only worshipped the feathered serpent, they embodied its logic, its paradox, its power, and its blood. And the most disturbing truths were hidden beneath the surface. For centuries, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent remained silent, an imposing, eroded structure, half devoured by time. Locals whisperad legends. Scholars made conjectures, but no one could imagine what was hidden under layers of stones until archaeologists discovered it in the late 80s and early 2000s. What they found was not only unexpected but disturbing. Hidden under the foundations of the temple were a series of chambers and pits sealed for a long time, each of them full of carefully arranged human remains. These were not the messy results of war or disease. These were deliberate, systematic, ritual, and cold sacrifices. The victims, over 200, were young men, many between 15 and 25 years old. Some wore necklaces made with human jaws. Others had their hands tied behind them. A few had been beheaded. Nearby lay scattered obsidian knives, sharp and black as night. They were undoubtedly tools used for ritual sacrifices. And this is where the story gets darker. The arrangement of the bodies followed geometric, symbolic patterns. They were not buried randomly. They were placed in quadrants, in cardinal directions, possibly to reflect the cosmos. Even the number of bodies mattered greatly. It was not only about death alone. It was about a very significant death. The victims were surrounded with offerings. Bones of a jaguar, snakes, exotic shells from the distant Gulf Coast, figurines, and obsidian blades that had never been used in battle. It was not a punishment at all. It was a gift indeed. These young men, probably warriors, had been selected not to die in disgrace, but as part of something transcendent. For the Teotihuacanos, the mere act of building temples could require human sacrifices. It was as if each stone was consecrated by blood. Each layer was raised only after an offering. The more that was excavated, the more sacrifices they found. In a chamber, archaeologists discovered elaborate tunnels full of mercury and micaceous materials linked to the underworld. The ground shone just like water. Was it a symbolic passage into the land of the dead? A mirror to the night sky? The more they excavated, the more it seemed the temple had not been built on death, but to enclose it. The blood did not stain stone by accident. The stone was destined to contain the blood, all of which was for the gods. If you look closely at the temple of the feathered serpent, you will notice something strange, something disturbing. It is not only found within the landscape. It is aligned to the universe. Teotihuacan was not built randomly. The entire city was laid out following cosmic axes. Its central avenue of the dead runs at an angle of 15 degrees to true north. It is not an error, but a deliberate displacement, possibly to align with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster or with the sun on ritual dates. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent is located directly along this avenue, enclosing it within a great celestial plane. But why is that? With what were they trying to align it? Archaeologists have debated this for decades. Some suggest the temple aligns with sunrise on the equinox. Others argue it is connected to Venus, the most sacred planet for Mesoamerican civilizations, often associated with war, sacrifice, and rebirth. When Venus rose or set, wars were declared, offerings were made, and temples activated with ritual fire. Even the temple's dimensions seem intentional. The repetition of the number 7, the number of visible planetary bodies, appears on its step platforms. There is symmetry, rhythm, and an impressive understanding of terrestrial mathematics and cosmic cycles. And under the surface, there are more clues. In 2003, archaeologists discovered a tunnel beneath the temple. It was not a rudimentary passage, but a deliberately built underground world. The walls were covered with powdered pita, a shiny mineral that would have reflected light like that of the stars. In combination with pools of mercury and the micro-lined walls, the tunnel seemed designed to replicate the cosmos. Walking through would be like traveling through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey to the underworld or perhaps rebirth. Was this temple not only a place of sacrifice, but a cosmic machine? A portal that aligned the earth, sky, and spiritual realm. Some scholars believe Teoti saw time as circular, not linear. Each ritual, each building, each sacrifice was not a unique event. It was part of an eternal cycle always. Death led to renewal. Sacrifice fueled a rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped predict celestial movements, coordinate harvests, and, more importantly, the timing to offer blood. The temple of the feathered serpent did not only gaze at the stars. I was trying to speak to them. The temple of the feathered serpent was not just a spiritual beacon. It was a political weapon. Its very design was intended to overwhelm, intimidate, and remind all viewers, local or foreign, who held power in Teotihuacan. Imagine standing in its shadow 1,800 years ago. You, a visitor from a smaller city-state, would arrive at the Avenue of the Dead, already impressed by the size of Teotihuacan. But upon arriving at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you would be paralyzed. The serpent heads would stare at you, baring their fangs. The symbols of jaguars growl from stone. The square that was seen in front formerly hosted large gatherings, not only to celebrate parties, but also to celebrate public rituals. One could even witness a sacrifice. The ruling elite of Teotihuacan had understood something crucial. Fear is power, and nothing instills fear more than divine wrath. By organizing ritual executions in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and images of death, they sent a clear message. The gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. But this was not chaos. It was theater. Priests with feathered headdresses and obsidian masks sang, danced, and shed blood, turning a cosmic myth into political representation. It was not just pleasing the gods. It was about reminding all viewers that the city's rulers had direct access to the divine. Only they could open the heavens or invoke rain, protect the people or destroy their enemies. Even architecture contributed to reinforcing this propaganda. From the upper tiers of the temple, the leaders could survey the square. They controlled not only the story, but also the physical space in which it unfolded. The people looked up to the gods, to the rulers, to the sacrifices, and knew what their place was. And for outsiders, Teotihuacan did not need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. The dignitaries who visited took home tales of awe and terror. They spoke of the feathered serpents, of the endless avenues, of the blood rituals that stained the sky red. In a world where the gods ruled through fear, Teotihuacan positioned itself as its chosen spokesperson, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was its loudest voice. At its peak, Teotihuacan was the heart of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, a city that seemed destined to last forever. But around the year 550 A.D.C., something changed, something broke, and the silence that followed was as chilling as the temple's stone serpent heads. The fall of Teotihuacan was not noisy or glorious. It was gradual, then sudden. The first signs of tension began appearing decades earlier. Signs that the cosmic engine was failing. The evidence points to a long period of drought, crop failure, and social unrest. The same systems that had sustained this great city, the centralized power, the religious dominance, and the cosmic order, began to crack under pressure. And then the fire. Archaeologists have discovered burn layers spread through the elite enclosures, temples, and administrative buildings, including signs of violent destruction in the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The strange thing is that the lower residential areas were left virtually intact. It was not an external invasion. It was an uprising, a rebellion, possibly from within. It is possible that the same people who previously contemplated the sacrifices with reverence rebelled against their priest-kings. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, once a symbol of divine authority, was looted. The sculptures were defaced. Fires were started. The ritual spaces were desecrated. And then silence. Teotihuacan was not completely abandoned overnight, but it lost its soul. The commercial networks collapsed. The artistic production ceased. The great rituals stopped. The ruling elite disappeared. The temple no longer spoke. And, nevertheless, the mystery only grew deeper. Because although the city faded, its memory endured. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and came across its ruins. They were stunned. They believed that the gods had built this place. They called it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They built their own myths around its pyramids, venerating them as sacred land, although they had no idea who its original builders were. For them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin. It was a relic of divine truth. But the irony remains. The most powerful city of its time, built on cosmic order and blood, disappeared without leaving a single written word, without a final record, leaving only stones and questions. The gods, apparently, had fallen silent. For more than 1,000 years, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent remained buried under layers of dust, volcanic ash, and silence. The locals avoided it. The farmers plowed around it, and the world forgot it until the modern era of archaeology arrived and unveiled the secrets buried in its heart. At the beginning of the 20th century, Mexican archaeologists began to excavate Teotihuacan. What they found was amazing, a perfectly designed city much older than the Aztecs. But it was not until the 80s and 2000s that the temple itself began to reveal its most intimate and chilling secrets. One of the most dramatic discoveries occurred in 2011, when researchers discovered a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been deliberately closed almost 1,800 years before, as if to prevent anyone from ever entering again. After years of excavations, scientists unearthed a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld lined with pyrite to mimic a starry sky, pools of liquid mercury, and thousands of ritual objects. Jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, and even carved wooden masks. It seemed more like a message than a tomb. Why did the ancient builders go to such extremes? Were they trying to preserve or hide? Some experts believe that the tunnel was used in initiation rituals. Others suggest that it symbolized the creation of the world, a mythological uterus where the gods were born, where the kings were created, where the divine order was negotiated between humans and the cosmos. Mercury, which was previously believed to be only toxic, could have represented the water or the fluid veil between the worlds. And among all these shining fragments, there was a persistent whisper. The feathered serpent still endured, not only as a myth, but as a presence in murals, in carvings, in the geometry of the temple itself. The serpent had not disappeared. It had coiled deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. And with each excavation, each jaw discovered, or each golden ornament, we get a little closer to its message, one that is not written in a language, but in stone, sacrifice, and shadows. Modern science has given us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. But even with all our tools, a truth remains. The temple still holds secrets. Today, the Temple of the Father Serpent stands as a disturbing monument, not only of a long-vanished civilization, but of a way of thinking that merged power, the cosmos, and death into an unbreakable system. Tourists take photos. Children run next to the stone serpent heads, but the ground under their feet is soaked with thousands of unknown stories and more than 200 known human sacrifices. And yet the temple still stands. His legacy is not only architectural, it is psychological, spiritual, and cultural. The feathered serpent, this paradoxical god of sky and earth, continued to evolve. It was adopted by the Toltecs and then reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where its myth acquired a softer tone. The bearer of knowledge, the god who wept for humanity, the one who swore to return. This reinterpretation of the serpent god shows how myths do not die, but transform. Even in modern Mexico, the echoes of the feathered serpent persist in art, in murals, in literature, and in national identity. The image of the temple has appeared on coins, stamps, and even government buildings. It has become a symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian splendor, and the indomitable spiritual world that once beat in Mesoamerica. But there is another legacy, less visible and more uncomfortable. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent forces us to face the price of faith. It raises difficult questions. How far will human beings go to feel connected to the divine? What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Can beauty coexist with terror? In many ways, the temple is not just a historical place. It is a mirror, a reflection of ourselves. Our fascination with life after death, our thirst for meaning, our ability to build monuments of astonishing beauty and stain them with blood. The temple teaches us that greatness comes accompanied by shadows, that civilizations can reach impossible heights while burying their secrets under stones. And perhaps that is why we keep coming back, not only to visit, but to understand it. Because deep down we know that the serpent continues watching, not to attack, but to remind us what we were and what we can still be. Before speaking with words, we spoke with rhythms. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the invention of writing, even before language's birth, the first human beings began to create something that could only be described as sound with intention. It was not speech nor melody, but rhythm. A hand hitting a hollow bark, a stick hitting stone, a foot stepping on the ground to the beat. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something magical arose. The first drumbeat. It was not called music. It was not called anything, but it felt like something, like communication, like movement, like emotion taking shape. Anthropologists have discovered evidence of primitive percussion instruments dating back more than 30,000 years. They were probably made with natural materials. Tree trunks, hollowed-out pumpkins, stretched animal skins. Nothing sophisticated, nothing preserved. But these rudimentary drums were not toys or mere distractions. They had real purposes: to warn, to summon, to connect. Imagine a tribe scattered through a dense forest. A beat of a distant drum, and the others knew that danger approached, or that a celebration had begun, or that the gods were listening. The first drums were not just tools. They were extensions of the human body, an externalized heartbeat, a pulse that could be felt through a valley. Playing the drum was not something that was seen or heard. It was something that was participated in together around bonfires, under the stars, in caves where echoes made the air vibrate. These ancestral rhythms became a language of emotions: joy, pain, warning, hope, all expressed not in syllables or symbols, but in sound patterns. Before the first flutes were carved, before stringed instruments were dreamed of, the drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, shaping rituals, and uniting individuals and tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's first instrument and, perhaps, its first form of collective identity. It doesn't matter what part of the world people lived in. They created something to hit, something to mark time. Because even when we had no words, we had rhythm. And that rhythm was everything. In the cradle of early human civilization, drums were not only instruments. They were sacred voices. Each tribe, each culture, each corner of the earth developed its own rhythm. But the purpose was almost universal: to communicate with the unseen. In Africa, where some of the first drums emerged, rhythm was deeply intertwined with life, death, and ancestors. It was believed that the gam, carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin, contained three spirits: that of the tree from which it was carved, that of the animal whose skin gave it voice, and that of the craftsman who gave it life. Played in circles, the gem not only accompanied rituals. It was the ritual. Then there were the talking drums, capable of imitating human speech through tone and timbre. In West Africa, these drums transmitted messages kilometers away, relaying news, warnings, births, and deaths from town to town. Long before the telephone, human beings already transmitted their messages across the landscape. On the other side of the ocean, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living being. It was the heartbeat of Mother Earth, and it was played in ceremonies to honor the ancestors, invoke healing, or guide the souls of the dead. The great powwow drum, played by a circle of percussionists, was an engine both musical and spiritual, a community pulse that aligned humans with nature and spirit. In Australia, the Aborigines used sticks and percussive footsteps in the sacred time of the dream, a mythical era of creation. In the Arctic Inuit shamans beat frame drums to enter a trance, seeking visions or communicating with spirits during dark winters. It wasn't about performances. They were acts of survival, healing, storytelling, and connection. Playing the drum was remembering. Playing the drum was belonging. It was always something communal. The drums brought people together in sacred circles, synchronizing hearts and intentions. No sheet music, no stage, just bodies in motion, hands hitting, souls moving, all unified by rhythm. It didn't matter what part of the world you were in. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was happening, something that words alone could never express. From sacred circles to bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken, sometimes with comfort, others with authority. As human societies evolved into kingdoms and empires, drums became tools of domination, instruments of order, and weapons to instill fear. The first armies had no radios or megaphones. They had drums. In ancient China, huge drums called bao were played to coordinate troops on vast terrains. With a single resounding rumble, commanders could signal a charge, a retreat, or a flanking maneuver. These drums were not only loud, they were strategic. Each rhythm meant something specific, and trained soldiers knew how to listen, even in the chaos of battle. In Mesopotamia, temple drums were used to announce rulers and summon the public. But in times of conflict, they resonated through the city walls, terrorizing enemies with a deep, relentless thunder. It wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they carried with them the tympanum, a frame drum used in processions and by cults such as that of Cybele. Although it was not a battle instrument like horns and banners, it had a symbolic power. It was the sound of empire, discipline, and order. But no army handled drums like the Ottomans. Their Mater bands, the first known military orchestras in the world, unleashed an overwhelming storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before battles. The implacable roll of the curse, gigantic kettle drums, and the davul, low, double-headed drums, terrified the enemy forces. Some European accounts describe soldiers paralyzed by panic even before seeing the Ottomans, stunned by the sound. The drums also projected power outside the battlefield. In the royal courts of Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles announced arrivals, marked coronations, and underscored political rituals. Playing a drum was declaring, "Power is here." Even the slaves in America used drums as tools of resistance. On the plantations, rhythmic communication kept culture alive and helped orchestrate secret rebellions. The drum, even under oppression, refused to be silenced. So, whether to signal divine right, military discipline, or pure fear, the drum has always conveyed a message. This is who commands. This is who marches, and this is the rhythm of power. As civilizations spread across continents, so did their rhythms, which evolved in form, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums became tools of precision, spirituality, and ceremony. In the West, they leaned toward military power and, eventually, orchestral grandeur. Two worlds, two paths, one heartbeat. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument of divine language. The tabla, with its crisp tones and fluid grace, was used in classical music and devotional performances. But it was more than just accompaniment. It was a conversation. Each strike had a name, a meaning, a syllabic identity. Indian percussion was not just percussion. It was recited poetry trained for decades. The percussionist was not just a musician. He was a linguist of rhythm. In Japan, the taiko drum emerged as a ceremonial giant. It was played in Shinto rituals, in theater, and in war. The taiko not only required technical skill, but also physical discipline. The percussionists moved with military precision. Their postures were firm, like those of warriors. At festivals, the roar of the taiko echoed through the mountain valleys, where it was believed to ward off evil spirits and call the gods to descend to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang drum led the hypnotic flow of the gamelan orchestras, guiding dancers and musicians in sacred temple ceremonies. These rhythms were layered, intertwined, and celestial, a sonic reflection of cosmic harmony. On the other side of the world, in Europe, drums had a different story. During the Middle Ages, they had a primarily utilitarian function, to give signals to soldiers, mark time, and enforce discipline. It was not until the Renaissance and the Baroque periods that drums began to be introduced into formal music. Even then, they remained in the background, rumbling under royal fanfare or resonating in the great cathedrals. Two philosophies can be seen in this divergence. The East saw rhythm as art and spirit, something linked to breathing, singing, and meditation. The West saw it as structure and strength, a tool to gather, march, and measure. But both understood the fundamental power of drums. Shape time, dictate rhythm, elevate rituals, connect human beings in ways that transcend language. From mountaintop temples to jungle clearings, from desert bonfires to candlelit cathedrals, drums have always had a place where the human meets the divine. Long before organized religion took root, rhythm was already a sacred language, a way to pray, to summon, to transcend. In Africa, drums were not just instruments, they were spiritual beings. In African traditions, for example, the batar drum was used to communicate with the orishas, the gods, and ancestral spirits. The percussionists were not performers, they were priests. The rhythms they played were coded prayers that invited the gods to descend and dance among the living. Each pattern had a purpose, each strike a direction. In Hinduism, the drum even appears in the hands of the gods. The deity Shiva, in his Natrajal form, dances the cosmic dance of creation and destruction with a small, hourglass-shaped drum, the damaru, in his hand. Its rhythm represents the very pulse of the universe. From silence into sound, from emptiness to form, the drum is a divine heartbeat. In Buddhism, ritual drums are used in monastic chants and meditation ceremonies. Its slow, gentle strokes guide breathing and awareness, acting as a metronome for the soul. It is not noisy. It is not aggressive. It simply reminds the practitioner to return to the present moment. Throughout America, indigenous tribes use drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The rhythm is constant, regular, imitating the rhythm of the womb, helping participants enter trance states or connect to ancestral spirits. In these spaces, the drum not only accompanies prayer, it is the prayer. Even within Christianity, where rhythm used to be moderate, the drum found a sacred role. In gospel traditions, especially in African American churches, drums became a means of praise and power, a beat behind voices raised in devotion, a reminder of struggle, hope, and the divine rhythm in every life. Regardless of the faith, ritual, or God invoked, the drum has been present not as decoration, but as a vessel of energy, intention, and the mysteries we cannot express. Because when words fail during worship, rhythm remains and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were solitary instruments. One body, one sound, one purpose. But in the heart of the industrial age, something revolutionary happened. In factories, streets, and music halls, percussion was reinvented. And by the early 20th century, drums were no longer scattered across a stage. They came together to form something completely new, the drum kit. It was born of necessity. In the late 19th century, military and theater bands needed several percussionists to play the bass drum, snare drum, cymbals, and woodblocks, each handled by a different person. But space was tight and budgets even tighter. So drummers began combining instruments into a single playable set. The first bass drum pedal was patented in 1909. Now a drummer could hit a huge drum with one foot, freeing their hands to do other things. The idea quickly became popular. Over the next decades, drummers added hi-hats, toms, cowbells, and cymbals, creating a setup that could mimic an entire percussion section, all from a single seat. What emerged was more than just a tool. It was the drummer's throne. And then came jazz. In the smoky clubs and speakeasies of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum kit came to life. Jazz drummers not only kept time, but played the drums as if it were a voice with syncopation, swing, and sensitivity. Legends like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich turned the drums into a main instrument. Rhythm became a way of telling stories. As jazz evolved into rock, the drums became louder, heavier, and more powerful. In the 60s and 70s, drums were expanded with multiple toms, splash cymbals, and double bass drum pedals. Drummers like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed resistance and creativity to the limit. The drummer was no longer in the background. It was the engine. Today, the drum kit is a staple around the world. From gospel churches to electronic music stages, from punk garages to world tours. And even with the rise of digital drums and drum machines, the physicality of a live drum kit, the drumsticks, the skins, the sweat, remains irreplaceable. It is a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries, where tradition meets innovation and where a drummer can speak with 10 voices at once. The world beats in thousands of dialects, and so do its drums. From continent to continent, from culture to culture, the drum has taken on countless forms, each with a distinct identity, sound, and purpose. They are not just instruments. They are cultural signs made with local materials, shaped by local hands, and steeped in the rhythms of everyday life. In West Africa, the jah continues as the heartbeat of community gatherings. It speaks with dry blows and deep bass tones, designed for telling stories and spontaneous conversation. Next to it, the don-don provides a fundamental pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which others can dance. In Africa, a set of drums is more than music. It is a conversation between spirits, ancestors, and the living. In the Middle East, the dabuka, a goblet-shaped drum of clay or metal, offers crisp, fast rhythms, essential to belly dancing and classical Arabic music. Its voice is sharp and articulate, demanding precision from the performer and movement by the listeners. Throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell a different story, born from fusion and resilience. The conga, the bongo, and the timbo reflect a mixture of African, indigenous, and Spanish influences. In Cuba, the sacred bata drums are used in Santaya rituals. Each drum speaks a divine language linked with the Orishes. In Brazil, the roar of the surdo and the cuica drives the samba parades through streets, infusing joy into protests, prayers, and carnival. In India, the midangam and the tablar dominate the classical music of the south and north of the country, respectively. These drums are so precise that they are tuned, blurring rhythm and melody. Every finger movement matters. Each blow carries centuries of tradition. Then, there's the frame drum. One of the oldest in mankind's history, it appears in everything from the Persian daf to the Irish bodhran, and from shamanic tools to folk ensembles. It is played with fingertips, mallets, or brushes, proof that even simplicity can be sacred. What unites all of them? The purpose. Whether to guide dance, healing, rituals, or revolution, each drum reflects its people's soul. Their rhythms convey geography, history, and identity. The global family of drums is not only diverse, but also universal. Because wherever you go, the earth continues its resonance with rhythm. As the 20th century closed, the sound of drums began to change, not in rhythm, but in texture. The physical gave way to what's programmable. Sweaty palms, wooden drumsticks, calloused fingertips all began sharing space with circuits, pads, and software. The digital drum kit era had arrived. It began in the 1970s with early drum machines. Early devices, like the Rhythm Icon and the Roland CR78, used analog circuits for simulating basic rhythms. At first, they sounded robotic and strange. But musicians saw even more: consistency, control, and endless possibility. Then a revolution came. In 1980, Roland released the TR-808, an iconic drum machine whose deep, rumbling kick drum and crisp snare defined entire genres. Hip-hop, techno, electro, and trap were born partly from its synthetic pulse. It was no longer about imitating acoustic drum kits. It involved creating completely new sounds. As digital audio advanced, the tools did too. Electronic drums, such as the Roland V drums, allow drummers to play naturally while triggering thousands of synthesized or sampled tones. Artists could now rehearse silently, record without microphones, and switch drum kits at a button's touch. And with computers came digital audio workstations, DAWs like Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic. Now, anyone with a laptop could create complex rhythms, layering kick drums, snares, hi-hats, and sub-bass in vast sonic architectures. Playing drums with fingers on MIDI pads became its own art form. Some feared this change meant death for traditional drumming, the replacement of human feeling with cold precision. But that did not happen. Instead, a hybridization emerged. Acoustic drummers began to integrate triggers and samples into their kits. Producers began layering human-played drums with machine-made rhythms. The organic and synthetic found a groove together. The digital drums did not erase the past. They reimagined it. And today we live in a world in which a single person in a room can create rhythms that previously required entire orchestras, where the ancient rhythms of Africa, Asia, and America can be sampled, retouched, and take on new life on dance floors illuminated with neons. The tools have changed, but the purpose remains the same: to move the body, to give shape to time, to make silence speak. Throughout all eras, all empires, and all technological evolutions, there's one thing that has never changed. The drum set continues to be our oldest and most durable instrument. From the ancient circles of fire to modern concert halls, from sacred rituals to digital dance floors, the drum has never been just music. It is about the connection with ourselves, with others, with something bigger. It is the heartbeat that we all share, not figuratively, but literally. Because even before being born, nestled in the uterus, the first rhythm we heard is that of our mother's heart. Constant, safe, alive. And when life begins, we pursue that rhythm forever. The drum has been our companion in joy and war, in worship and in protest. It has marched alongside kings and has risen with the rebels. It has resonated in temples and subway tunnels. It speaks in all languages because it is a language, one that bypasses thought and speaks directly to the body, to the bones, to the blood. In moments of pain, we play the drum to mourn. In moments of ecstasy, we play the drum to celebrate. And in the quiet spaces in between, we play the drum to remember who we are. Today, percussion continues to evolve. You can find street musicians with handpans weaving new age rhythms on city corners. Indigenous communities that preserve ancient percussion traditions against all odds. Drummers in stadiums cheering on crowds in unison. Children banging pots and pans with instinctive joy. Even artificial intelligence is learning the rhythm. But no algorithm can replicate the human soul behind a single imperfect stroke. Because rhythm is not only counted, it is felt. And perhaps that is why the drum has survived empires and trends. Because deep down we all yearn for the anchor of time, the shared pulse that tells us that we are here together now. However advanced our instruments may be, or however virtual our experiences become, there will always be something deeply rooted in the contact of skin with skin, stick with skin, hand with wood, a rhythm, a breath, a beginning. The drum is not a relic of the past. It is a reminder that we have always been destined to move to the rhythm, to listen, to feel, to touch. And as long as humanity endures, the drum will never be silent. Before Manhattan became a forest of glass and steel, it was an island of shadows, not cast by towers, but by church steeples and sloping roofs. In the early 19th century, the skyline barely existed. The city clung to the southern end of the island, a dense expanse of brick houses, timber-framed shops, and dirt streets. Buildings rarely exceeded 5 or 6 stories. Not because there was a lack of ambition, but because gravity had the last word. The taller the building, the more weight it bore, and with stone and brick, height came at a very high price. The walls had to be thicker at the bottom to support the upper levels, which left less space inside and required huge foundations. Building high was building with weight, and weight made no financial sense. Thus, the city grew horizontally, extending north along a grid that had been planned in 1811, one of the boldest urban planning projects of its time. But beneath that grid, beneath the layers of cobblestones and earth, Manhattan hid a secret weapon. The bedrock. Deep, dense, and unwavering. The granite backbone that stretched beneath the island would one day support some of the tallest structures in the history of mankind. But for now it remained calm, intact, waiting. Life in early Manhattan was noisy, but down to earth. The commerce was bustling in the port. The ships were lining up in the docks, and the horses were galloping through the narrow streets. The economy grew, immigration increased, and the island overflowed with energy, but the city remained stuck to the ground. The sky remained intact. The only vertical constructions were the churches, among which Trinity Church stood out. Its spire, finished in 1846, rose over 85 meters and, for a time, was the tallest structure in New York. But even that was more a symbol than a skyscraper. What nobody knew then was that the future horizon would be marked not by stone or wood, but by iron, steel, and vision. And it would not be limited by the ground. It would rise far above it. Manhattan was not yet a city of skyscrapers, but the stage was set. The island was ready. The dream was forming, and soon the horizon would begin to extend. For centuries, gravity was the greatest architect of Manhattan. It kept buildings low, cities flat, and human ambition tied to the earth. But in the mid-19th century, two revolutionary advances would open the horizon wide. One elevated people, the other buildings. The first arrived in 1852, when an inventor named Elisha Otis presented his revolutionary safety elevator. In a spectacular demonstration at New York's Crystal Palace, Otis climbed onto a platform suspended high above a crowd. He ordered the rope cut. The crowd held its breath, but the platform did not fall. A hidden mechanism blocked the elevator in place. With that single, overwhelming moment, Otis changed the rules of height. Until then, the upper floors of buildings were the cheapest. Nobody wanted to climb stairs. But once elevators became safe and practical, those upper floors became privileged spaces, offering light, air, and status. Suddenly, the vertical city made sense from an economic point of view, but being able to raise people was not enough. The buildings were still dependent on load-bearing walls, which became thicker and heavier the more they rose. That is where the second innovation arrived, the steel skeleton. In the decades of 1880 and 1890, the engineers began to use steel structures to support the weight of the buildings, which allowed the exterior walls to become thin curtains instead of heavy structural anchors. This method, known as construction with a steel structure, gave architects a new freedom to build as high as the structure could support. Suddenly, height was no longer a risk, but a strategy. The technology had arrived. The materials were there. And Manhattan, with its solid bedrock and booming economy, was the perfect canvas. The narrow geography of the island fostered vertical thinking, and its status as a financial capital meant that everyone, from banks to newspapers, wanted their names to be visible in the clouds. The elevator made the sky accessible. The steel skeleton made the sky buildable. Together, they not only changed the architecture, they redefined what a city could be. Now the race would begin, not outwards but upwards. At the end of the 19th century, New York City was no longer satisfied with expanding. It wanted to rise. The ground was full. The streets were crowded, and the only place left to build was upwards. With the construction of steel structures and the elevator already established, Manhattan became a testing ground and the horizon a battlefield for ambition. The first shots were fired in the 1890s. In 1890, the New York World Building, headquarters of Joseph Pulitzer's journalistic empire, rose 20 floors above Park Row. It was the tallest office building in the world. For a short time, so as not to be left behind, the Park Row building claimed the title in 1899 with a height of 391 feet. Each new tower was a declaration, not just of wealth, but of vision. To build higher was to announce, "We are the future soon." The horizon began to sprout steel giants. The Singer Building, completed in 1908, rose to 186 meters, becoming the tallest building in the world and the first structure to surpass the height of the Trinity Church spire, which had held the record for more than 50 years. But not even that would last. In 1913, the Woolworth Building took the crown. Designed by the architect Cass Gilbert and financed in cash by the retail magnate Frank W. Woolworth. It rose 792 feet over 55 floors in a towering display of neo-Gothic beauty. Nicknamed the Cathedral of Commerce, the Woolworth was not only tall. It was majestic, an architectural sermon on the rise of the United States as a modern power. But it was not only an architectural competition. It was a brand war. Corporations and institutions competed for the tallest and most distinctive buildings, towers that would engrave their names in the sky. Each new height was a headline, each silhouette a symbol. The skyscraper became the ultimate billboard, permanent, imposing, impossible to ignore. And beneath it all, the rhythm of progress beat tirelessly. The steam shovels excavated the foundations in the granite. The riveters hammered the steel day and night. Immigrants and iron workers swayed on beams hundreds of feet high without harnesses, only with their determination and courage. The horizon was no longer theoretical. It was real, and it was rising. As the 1920s roared in Manhattan, the horizon began to dance, not just climb. It was the era of Art Deco, an era in which architecture was not only about height, but about style as well. The Jazz Age poured elegance into steel and stone, and the buildings of New York became icons of movement, light, and energy. The most dazzling of them all was the Chrysler Building. Finished in 1930, it was 1,046 feet tall and briefly became the tallest building in the world. Commissioned by automobile magnate Walter Chrysler, the tower was not just a monument to business success. It was a symphony of design. Its stainless steel spire, built in secret and hoisted overnight, shone in the sun like a crown. Ornamental eagles inspired by hood ornaments protruded from the corners as guardians of the future. With its curves, its chevrons, and its details typical of the industrial era, the Chrysler Building not only grazed the sky, but seduced it. But the race was not over. Just a few blocks away, another titan stood. The Empire State Building, completed in 1931, in the middle of the Great Depression, rose to 381 meters, snatching the title from the Chrysler and holding it for almost 40 years. Built in just 410 days with thousands of workers laboring under wind, snow, and steel dust, the Empire State was not just a building. It was a message. New York endures. While much of the country struggled to survive, Manhattan rose, and its buildings reflected the dual identity of the era. Elegant but aggressive, optimistic yet competitive. The Art Deco style captured the contradictions of the era. Geometric but elegant, modern but impregnated with myth. The towers were not only functional. They were sculpted, shining at night, like beacons of possibility. And yet, beneath all that shine, there was a purpose. These skyscrapers were built by barons and tycoons who wanted more than profits. They wanted to leave a legacy, a permanent place on the horizon and in history. By the end of the 1930s, the silhouette of Manhattan had taken shape. The city was no longer just the capital of finance. It was a cathedral of ambition, a horizon that did not whisper progress. It shouted it. After the Second World War, the Manhattan skyline entered a new phase. Less ornamental, more corporate. The elegance of Art Deco gave way to glass, steel, and straight lines. The United States was now a world superpower, and New York was the headquarters of that empire. The skyline adapted accordingly, not with decorative needles, but with monuments to efficiency. In 1952, the headquarters of the United Nations rose above the East River, a bold and square glass tower flanked by low marble wings. It marked a change of tone, global, diplomatic, futuristic. It was not just a building. It was an architectural statement about the international order in the atomic age, and it set the tone for what came next. Next came the Lever House in 1952 and the Seagram Building in 1958. Both are defining examples of the international style. These towers, with their curtain walls of reflective glass and steel structures, had a minimalist design, without decoration, stripped of sentimentality. They did not look like cathedrals or castles. They looked like machines, precise, modern, and ruthlessly practical. The Seagram building, designed by Ludwigmus van der Ria, was especially influential. Its bronze-tinted glass, its uniform grid, and its open plaza introduced a new type of urban presence. Not to impress with flourishes, but to project order, discipline, and power. It was corporate architecture at its peak. Cold, beautiful, and authoritarian. As companies prospered, so did the skyline. Midtown became the nerve center of the main companies, banks, media, and law firms of the United States. These new skyscrapers did not compete for beauty. They competed for square meters, for location, and for presence on the skyline. Spires and gargoyles were left behind. In their place stood mirrored monoliths, anonymous giants that reflected not only the clouds, but also the ambitions of Wall Street. And yet, in their silence and simplicity, these towers said a lot. They told the story of a country obsessed with growth, precision, and modernity. They defined the corporate era, shaping the look and feel of cities around the world. But even in the midst of all this, glass and steel, one thing remained true. The skyline was still a symbol. Only now it whispered power instead of shouting beauty. In the late 1960s, New York was already a vertical masterpiece, but it still had room to dream big. That dream took shape at the southern end of Manhattan, where a pair of identical towers would soon alter the skyline forever. They were bold, controversial, and unlike anything the world had seen until then. They were the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, conceived as a nerve center for world trade. The World Trade Center project was supervised by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The architect, Minoru Yamasaki, designed the buildings with a radical minimalist approach. Vertical lines, aluminum cladding, no setbacks. Each tower would rise more than 160 feet, eclipsing all the buildings that stood before them. The ambition was not only architectural, it was ideological, a statement of global connectivity, a new temple for capitalism. Construction began in 1966. To make room, an entire neighborhood, Radio Row, was raised. The foundations required a revolutionary technique known as a slurry wall, which allowed engineers to build deep into the soft riverbed while containing the Hudson. It was one of the most challenging engineering feats of its time. When completed in 1973, the Twin Towers were not universally appreciated. Some critics called them sterile or boxy. Others lamented the loss of ornate towers of the past. But for many, the towers were pure presence, bold, safe, and imposing. They did not dance with the sky like the Chrysler Building. They did not narrow, like the Empire State. They stood firm, like twin pillars of certainty and scale. More than simple buildings, the World Trade Center became an international symbol of business, unity, and American power. People came from all over the world to visit the viewpoints, dine in the restaurants with world views, or simply contemplate in amazement from the square that extended at their feet. For almost 3 decades, the Twin Towers dominated Lower Manhattan. They anchored the horizon, giving it symmetry and solemnity. And although other cities built higher structures, none had the iconic weight of those 2 towers that stood side by side. The horizon had changed once again. This time, not with ornaments or art, but with monumental ambition. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the Manhattan skyline changed forever. Not by cranes or constructions, but by violence and smoke. In less than 2 hours, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center collapsed into dust, fire, and twisted steel. Thousands of lives were lost, and the 2 pillars that had once defined Lower Manhattan disappeared. The attack was not just an attack against people or buildings. It was an attack against symbols, against what those towers represented. Commerce, modernity, freedom, ambition. For decades, the Twin Towers had defined the southern end of the island. Their clean and monolithic forms had become a visual symbol of New York itself. Now, that horizon was fractured. In the following days and weeks, southern Manhattan became an open, smoking, and raw wound. Where before there was height and light, now there was only absence. And that absence resonated. The photographs of the horizon seemed empty. The familiar silhouette had broken, and the space that once throbbed with global energy became known as Ground Zero. For the first time in a century, Manhattan was not being built. It was in mourning. The city was in mourning, but it also resisted. Steel workers, firefighters, police, and volunteers came to the place, not to build, but to recover. The rubble was removed. Life was honored. Silence replaced the roar of iron. In a city always in a hurry, it was a forced pause, a long breath held in collective pain. But even in sadness, New York did what it had always done. It looked up. The debates about Reconstruction were complicated, emotional, and political. What should occupy the place of the towers? Should something be raised again? Could the horizon be restored without erasing the loss? For years, the hole in the ground remained, as a reminder of what had been and what was lost. It became a sacred space. And yet, little by little, plans emerged. Designs were drawn up. The cranes returned, the steel returned. Not to erase the tragedy, but to create something new next to it. But before anything was built, a truth became clear. The horizon was no longer just a symbol of power or ambition. It had become a memorial, a silhouette shaped as much by triumph as by tragedy. And history had not ended. After the devastation, a city known for its speed, ambition, and movement stopped. Not to surrender, but to reimagine. Rebuilding the Manhattan skyline after September 11th was not just about architecture. It was a matter of identity. What would rise in place of the Twin Towers? Could anything rise? The answers came slowly. In 2003, a design by architect Daniel Libeskind was selected for the New World Trade Center. It was not just about the height. It was about healing, memory, and renewal. The plan would combine commercial spaces with public memorials, parks, transportation, and light. It was not a return to what had been. It was a statement of what could be. At the center of everything stood a new tower, One World Trade Center, originally called Freedom Tower. Rising from the northwest corner of Ground Zero, it would become the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, at 1,776 feet tall. A number chosen to evoke the year of the independence of Estados Unidos, United States. But it was not just about patriotism. It was about defiance, about getting up again despite the loss. Construction began in 2006, and in 2014, One World Trade Center opened its doors. Clad in shining glass and standing like a glass obelisk, it did not try to imitate the past. It offered something new, reflection, both literal and symbolic. The building changes with the sky, shining, darkening, disappearing depending on the light. It is presence without arrogance. Next to it, the 9/11 Memorial was inaugurated in 2011. Two deep voids where the original towers once stood, each with a continuous waterfall and the names of the deceased engraved in bronze. It is not just part of the skyline. It is part of the soul of the city. The new skyline took years to take shape. Other towers rose, 3 WTC for WTC and 7 WTC, all of them elegant, modern, and with a purpose. Together, they represent not only a rebuilt city, but a transformed city. New York did not just replace what was lost. It evolved. It honored the past while building the future. And in doing so, it reminded the world of something deeply American and deeply human. A city can be torn down, but it cannot be prevented from rising. Today, the Manhattan skyline is more than a collection of buildings. It is a living symbol of ambition, of resilience, of the American dream itself. No other silhouette in the world has so much weight. It is engraved in pop culture, in history, and in memory. It can be drawn with 5 lines, and people recognize it instantly. It tells a story, the story of daring engineers and intrepid ironworkers, of architects who imagined needles piercing the clouds, and of immigrants who crossed oceans to help build them. It speaks of risk, reward, and reinvention. The constant bustle of New York New York itself. It has never been finished and never will be. The horizon is alive, ever-changing. In recent years, it has extended even further, but not in Lower Manhattan. This time, the vertical race has moved to the city's north. Along Billionaire's Row, super-slender residential towers such as 432, Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, and 111, West 57th Street now rise like needles above Midtown. These skyscrapers are feats of engineering, thin as pencils, whipped by wind, and made for the ultra-rich. Critics call them expressions of inequality that pierce the sky. Others see them as wonders of modern ambition. Meanwhile, in Hudson Yards, a completely new neighborhood has emerged with gleaming glass towers, public art, and corporate headquarters rising where train tracks once stretched. The horizon now extends farther west, evolving with the changing needs and ambitions of the city. But even as it grows, the horizon clings to its past. The Empire State Building continues to shine at night. The Chrysler continues to gleam at dawn, and the One World Trade Center stands solemn and proud. The horizon remembers what came before, even as it projects toward what will come after. More than any monument or statue, it is the horizon that defines New York, not only in its form, but also in its meaning. It is a place where humanity dared to build upwards again and again through booms, crises, wars, and wounds. A city of millions reflected in steel and glass. It doesn't just mark the city's limit. It marks the place where dreams begin. Because in Manhattan, the sky has never been the limit. It's just the next level.